There's no shops
Okay.
open. So brilliant. We're live on YouTube, Tomos. I don't know. We're not quite ready to start yet. So this is like so just for anybody that is happening to be watching us as we're streaming. This is Archaeology Day, Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Archaeology Day. And we're just going live a few minutes early just so we can get all the wrong words, spit out all the wrong words, get it out of our systems before we go completely live. This is like the bit of a conference where people are taking their seats and you see the presenters on the stage and the people that are just testing the slides out, all that sort of thing. So if anybody is watching us live, I'll do full introductions very, very shortly, but it's now's a quick chance to grab a cup of tea, nips to loo before we do get started at 10 o'clock. Isn't that right, Thomas? So we're just going to have to bear with us as we kind of get ourselves ready.
Yeah, so we've got the sort of, this is the kind of, I'm imagining if we were in the college now, this is where we would be directing people to the theatre.
We'd be sort of jiggling sort of slightly nervously, yeah.
Yeah,
so
that's it, frantically.
We're just going to have a little bit of a test and a bit of a run through, talk about the script, all that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, so I don't know, I mean, so I am, we're joined by Rowan. Hello, Rowan.
We've got Rowan here already. So Rowan will be speaking. She'll be in the live Q&A later, but she's also contributing today. So just so you know, Rowan, we this is just like a before the event. We're just doing some preparations. We thought it'd be nice if anybody is watching to imagine this is like the bit where you're registering and you're getting to your seat. And I can see Rowan's laughing there because you might find that quite funny. We're trying to visually imagine that. I don't know if you want to say good morning, Rowan, already. Oh, she's got her cup of tea. She's got her refreshments ready. Hopefully that'll keep her going, you know, until later on.
Nice one. So I don't know, Rowan's not joined us for any of the pre-prep up to now, so I don't know if she may not know what our plans are. So I mean, we can talk about this actually, and people, if anybody is watching, so we are live on YouTube, just so that Rowan knows as well. The way we're going to do this is we're going to have a little bit of talk, and then we're going to put a video on of. Also, all the talks are pre-recorded, and then we're going to put the video on, and then we're going to mute our microphones and turn off our videos, and the idea is then on YouTube people just see the video that is playing and don't see us or anything about us. And then at the end, all of the speakers are going to come together for a big Q&A, and we're going to talk about stuff. So that's just how that's our plan. We did a technical rehearsal yesterday. How did you feel about the technical rehearsal, Tomos?
I think it went okay. A little bit nervous, but obviously this morning it's the same, you know, because you never know how these events are going to go, and obviously we haven't done this type of event before, so it's
no, it's probably worth saying
for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's probably worth saying that none of us here are experts. It's our first time doing any sort of live YouTube broadcast, and we've had a lot of technical assistance behind the scenes. John from PlanEd,
who's hiding
behind the PlanEd square below me on my screen. He's going to appear very shortly.
Oh, there we go. There's John. So he's doing all the technical behind the scenes stuff. He's the really important person, isn't he?
The technical genius behind this. And John's got an amazing presentation coming on later on. Here's PlanEd's answer to Steve Jobs, and he's looking incredibly suave in his presentation later on. And he'll be joining us as well for the Q&A at the end. But also just to mention to Sophie, my colleague Sophie Jenkins, who's out there monitoring YouTube and keeping an eye on the comments, because what we will be doing is asking people that are watching if there are any live viewers. I've not even had a look on the YouTube channel on my other screen to see if we do have anybody watching us live. But if there are any live viewers who want to ask a question about the presentation, they can type a little comment into the comments bar on YouTube. So obviously there are lots of ways of watching YouTube these days. You can watch it on your phone, watch it on your laptop, or watch it on your smart TV, and perhaps other devices are available. But if you can get a comment into the comments bar if you've got a question about the presentation, and it could be what I would say about comments and questions is that there's no silly question, is there, Thomas? Because we're mindful that lots of people watching this might not be academic archaeologists, they might not be practicing archaeologists in any sense of the word, and they might have some really basic, questions, and we don't want people to feel intimidated or feel silly if they've got something that might seem a bit. And it might be something that we can answer just with a written response in the comments, or it might be something that we can put to the panel of experts at the very end. So if anybody, we'll be talking a bit more about that as well. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock as well, because at 10 o'clock we've got a script and everything, and we're gonna try and do it bilingual, aren't we? As much as we can.
So, just for anybody who's sort of you know, already dialed in and watching this sort of pre-event session, we've got this script, and we're going to try and I'll try and do bits in Welsh, and then Stuart will do bits in English, and then, you know, there'll be bits where we'll just be, you know, it'll be probably through the medium of English. And a lot of the talk, I think most of the talks, except for one virtual walk, is through the medium of Welsh, and that will be with subtitles. So
yeah, that's
it. It'll be a really nice day, actually, I hope.
Yeah, I think it will be. And as I say, we've got a script. We've only practiced half of the script, though, didn't we, Thomas?
So, we did. So hopefully it will go okay. We'll see how it goes. But it's good that we're actually able to, you know, get the live to work. I haven't actually checked, because obviously one thing that's probably worth pointing out to anybody who's sort of watching this pre-event preparation is there's a delay between this, what we're doing now, and YouTube, so about 30 seconds. So if I had the YouTube in the background at the same time, I'd probably have a headache and I'd start getting confused, because I would be able to keep up with which one.
I was just going to say, Thomas, so I've got it here. Apparently there are 44 people out there watching us just gabble away at them. So just to anybody that has just joined us.
Bore it's worth saying bore da. This is the bit where you're, so for those who are already viewing, this is the bit where you're making your way to the to sit down, and, you know, we would normally have a guest host for this, but as organisers, we felt that would be a lot of pressure, so we decided we would sort of try and host it ourselves as best as we can.
We're also, Thomas, under the illusion that we're charismatic enough to do that, which we'll see. But I think what it's worth just saying is, I've got about, for anybody that has joined us early, you've got about 5 minutes. You want to grab a cup of tea or pop to the loo or do whatever you want to do before we actually get started. We're going to kick off officially at 10 o'clock. We're just sort of testing a few things out, doing a few technical bits and pieces in the background, just sort of having a bit of a chat. This is sort of like the extras, the unseen extras bit, if anybody is sort of watching us a bit early. So yes.
Yeah, so we're about 3 minutes away from starting, Stuart.
Is it just worth a quick note that we can talk about this now for us, about where we are? So people might be looking at me and thinking, wondering why I've got such a spacious living.
Absolutely,
but actually,
absolutely.
Yeah, so it would be worth mentioning that I'm in the Planed offices in Narberth this morning, and we've had to kind of, if you saw me, you'd see that this is, I'm not really at a desk, I'm just sort of on this makeshift arrangement to try and make it look like it's it looks sort of appropriate on the screen. Yeah, and this banner's sort of covering up a big pile of stuff, and there's the plant down here is covering up a big pile of stuff as well. So, but I'm in the Planed offices because my broadband where I live isn't quite reliable enough to handle the full day's conference. So, but here in the Planed offices now, but it's very good. Everyone else is lucky enough to get good broadband where they are. But
well, Stuart, mine wasn't brilliant because I've got quite thick walls in my house. I'm in my house, so I'm not in the headquarters for the National Park due to the firebreak lockdown. But I am at home, and that's why I've got this lovely background, which hopefully is better. So yeah, so I've actually I've been working from home for, you know, like many, for a significant amount of time. And so I've actually got Ethernet connection, so hopefully it will be reliable. So I'm mindful that we're probably going to start the event very, very soon. So Rowan, I wondered whether you would be happy to join us back later during the Q&A. So we're hoping that will be around 20 to 12, but, you know, maybe if you dial it back in about half, sorry, not 20 to 12, sorry, half 11. If you dial back in around that time, hopefully we'll be ready to go. Okay, thanks, Rowan. So I'll let you kick off because it's now 10 o'clock. So maybe we can start the event.
Maybe, yeah, if everybody wants to finish, just wait for the last few people to take their seats. I'm just quickly sticking something up on to just to remind my family that they've got to come and watch me on YouTube as well.
Well,
there
that's
we
the
are.
important thing. We need the extra views, don't we? In case it's just us out there.
Well, I'm just refreshing 73 watching YouTube live right now. So yes, we're gonna get started. We said we were going to get started at 10 o'clock, and it's just rolling around to 10 o'clock now. So yeah, we're going to start the official proceedings for the 2020 Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Archaeology Day. So,
Stuart, I'm just thinking. Obviously, we're now going to start, but it's worth just pointing out. We did sort of dial in about 10 minutes early, just so people could see a bit of preparation and get an idea. We did explain a few things, but what we're going to do is we're going to try and do some of these live bits bilingually. So what you'll see is you'll probably see me talking a lot in Welsh, and then Stuart will repeat in English. So we're going to try that. We hope it works, but bear with us. We're both. This is a new working way for both of us.
That's right. It might be a bit clunky, perhaps. It might be a bit of nudging, cyber nudging, while Thomas sort of elbows me to say it's my turn to speak or something. Yeah. So we're gonna get started now. Our first presentation is going to start very shortly, but just a quick few things. So yeah, as I say, welcome to Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Archaeology Day 2020 morning. So how are you doing this morning, Thomas?
Dwi'n teimlo dipyn bach yn nervous, so I'm feeling a bit nervous. Oherwydd da ni ddim wedi wneud sesiwn fel hyn o blaen. Fel arfer fyswn ni yn y coleg, so we haven't done a session like this before. We'd usually be in the college. But heblaw hynna, dwi'n great, diolch, Stuart. So other than that, I'm great, Stuart. So, bore da, a chroeso I Stuart, a pawb sy'n helpu ni heddiw, a hefyd I pawb sydd yn gwylio ni. Gobeithio fyddwn ni'n gweld y nifer o bobl gwylio mynd fyny, a da ni'n mynd I fod yn danfon y diwrnod trwy YouTube. So good morning to you, Stuart, and everyone who's helping us, and welcome to the Archaeology Day, which we're hoping we'll see more people join us, but we'll be running through YouTube. So I'll pass it over to you, Stuart.
Brilliant, thanks, Thomas. So just in case, I'm just looking across. We've got 100 people exactly watching us live as I'm speaking, so that's lovely. Hope everybody is going to stick with us this morning. We've got some fantastic presentations. So just to do a quick introduction, so we know who we are and where we're coming from and all that sort of thing. My name is Stuart Berry, as it might say on the corner of my screen down here, and I am the cultural coordinator at Planed. People in Pembrokeshire might be aware of who Planed is, what Planed is as an organisation, but people from further afield might not have heard of Planed. Planed is a community charity that's involved in lots of different things: heritage, culture, tourism, agriculture, environment, communities, lots of different things. And I handle all the culture and heritage side of things. So that's who I am. Joined by Tomos Jones. Tomos is the community archaeologist at Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, and I'm sure that lots of people are aware of the beauty of the only coastal national park in the UK, and Thomas is lucky enough to look after all of the archaeology across the whole national park. So that's fantastic. So we're going to, as Thomas has mentioned, we are going to try and do this bilingually. I'll be handling the English stuff. I might attempt a couple of Welsh words here and there, and Thomas, I'm sure we'll make sure that my pronunciation is good and proper. But Thomas is going to handle all the Welsh stuff. All the talks today are going to be in English. We do have a little lunchtime presentation, a virtual tour around Awdurdod, and that's in Welsh, but that does have English subtitles, and I'm really looking forward to that. So yes, we also got just quick mention for all the help that we've got behind the scenes. So Thomas and I, who are doing this live, as it were, behind the scenes, we've got John Ewart, my colleague here at Planed, that's handling all the technical stuff, and he's been working tirelessly for the last weeks and months, editing all the contributors' videos. He's done done all the work on the Awdurdod video, all the subtitles, all that side of things, and then and is the technical genius behind the whole event. Really, we couldn't make it work, Thomas, without John. So we're grateful for the inordinate amount of time John has put to this, given that it's it's not really his role or his responsibility. He's been very generous with that. And then, of course, my colleague Sophie Jenkins, who's watching remotely but keeping an eye on the comments. So if anybody does add a comment on the YouTube chat today, it'll be Sophie who is handling those comments for this morning and this afternoon, responding to anything. And we're gonna mention that if you did want to ask a question of any of the presenters, we've got a live Q&A at the end of the morning session. That's going to be at about 11:20 20 to 12, that sort of time. And if you pop a question in the comments bar, we'll hopefully round all those questions up and see what we can put to the presenters in that live Q&A at the end this morning. So you can do that. If you can't get on the comments bar, or if you prefer, you can also email archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. That's archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. I think we'll see if we can get Sophie just to put that email address in the comments tab on YouTube, just so if anybody does want to drop us an email, they can have a look at that as well. And what we may do is see if we can work out with our technical side whether we can get a little caption or something to come up on the screen. That might be a stretch too far today, perhaps. So, but anyway, you can ask us some questions, and that's going to be a bit later on. Just a quick note on those. We're going to talk about our sessions coming up, but just a note. I know one of our presenters has already, unfortunately, had to give their apologies for the Q&A. So, Simon Hancock, whose talk's coming up a bit later, isn't feeling so good. He did send his apologies yesterday, so he won't be able to join us for the Q&A. But please do, if you've got any questions for Simon, do send them in. Do let us know, and we can always put them to him and see if we can get him to answer those outside of the realm of this video. So yes, this is the first time we've done anything like this, isn't it, Tomos?
Yeah, Stuart, it is the first time, so we're going to do our best, and we're going to try our best to stick to the times as well. So we hope to finish about midday. Wel, mae wedi bod yn flwyddyn rhyfedd, a mae hynny'n cario ymlaen. Dwi'n cofio tan o'n i'n dechrau trefnu'r diwrnod yn ystod datblygiadau Covid-19, ac o'n i'n meddwl sut da ni'n mynd i danfon y diwrnod, ond roeddwn i yn teimlo bod hi yn bwysig i ni ceisio danfon o, so bod bobl yn gallu mwynhau a dysgu am archeoleg yn y Parc Cenedlaethol a pwnciau mwy eang sy'n perthnasol. So it's been a really strange year, and I remember when we were starting to plan for this event, and then COVID-19 was, developing, and we were trying to work out how are we going to deliver this event, and we decided that it was important for us to deliver the event, so people can learn and enjoy about the archaeology in the National Park, and also those more broad issues, that are, affecting archaeology.
Yeah, so that's right. We did want to make the event sort of live via YouTube, and I think, as we might have mentioned a bit earlier on, usually the event is held at Pembrokeshire College, at the Merlin Theatre in Pembrokeshire College, and usually we attract a couple of hundred people, 200 people, something in that order of magnitude, is it, Tomos? And it's been successfully run for a good number of years. I think, were we into this, was it the 17th year, Tomos?
Yes. Yeah, I think it was the 17th last year. I think this is the 18th.
So this is the 18th year, and it's the first year it's virtual. And I think because we'd established, or because the event was so established, it was everyone was quite keen that we try and continue it, and that we do go ahead. And as you mentioned, it was quite early in the kind of the arc of events with COVID-19 that we made the decision to turn the event virtual. So there's been a lot of work going into it, because, as we mentioned, none of us are experts. None of us have done anything like this before. So that's brilliant. If anybody obviously is watching us, I'm just having a look at the YouTube now. There's a few comments coming in, so that's brilliant. And what we would love is, if anyone's watching this live, let us know who you are, where in the country you might be, what your link to archaeology is, or what your interest to archaeology or to Pembrokeshire is. It'd be really nice for us to kind of have a little bit of feedback to understand who's out there. There is some feedback stuff available, isn't there? So if anybody that wants to do, so usually when we put on these sorts of events, there's always an evaluation form, that sort of thing. Well, there's a virtual evaluation form this year again, and we're going to pop the link for that again in the comments. And again, we'll see if we can make sure everyone can get hold of that link, because it'll be just really useful to have the feedback, given that this is the first time we've tried anything like that.
So just adding to that, the links are actually on the channel page as well. I've added them, so you've got some pages. The program details are there as well, and also, mae werth pwysleisio bod mynediad i'r diwrnod am ddim flwyddyn yma, oherwydd fod llai o costau hefo danfon y diwrnod. Ond os ydych chi'n gallu, nes fo'n wych os ydych chi'n gallu rhoi roddion i'r ymddiriedoliaeth Parc Cenedlaethol, a mae'r link ar ein ar ein sianel ni, a dwi'n meddwl fydd Sophie yn postio'r link hefyd. So it's worth highlighting that the event this year is free, and that's because the costs of running the event has reduced significantly. So, you know, but what we would like to see, if you can, it would be great if you could donate to the National Park Trust. And if you can, the link is on our channel, and I think Sophie's going to put that in the comments chat section as well.
That's brilliant. Yeah, so there's quite a lot to take in there about comments, about the feedback form, and also about the donations to the National Park Trust. So there is a lot to take in there, but hopefully the links will be up in the chat, and we'll try and make sure those links are visible. They're also on the National Park event page, aren't they? So if anybody is if that's easier for people to access, maybe by their phones if they're watching this on a smart TV or whatever. So we've got a full programme today, and I'm noticing that the time's ticking on. We're very good at this preamble.
I was just going to say, Stuart, the time is going. I can see it's 11 minutes past 10, so I'm mindful of that. So apologies if we're hoping to finish at midday, but if we're slightly overrunning, we really apologise. We'll try to keep it as close to midday as we can.
There we are. Yeah. So we're just going to quickly run through this morning's programme now, and then I think we're going to be introducing the first talk. So Thomas, I think you're going to have a quick. You're going to discuss that in Welsh first, then I'm going to come answer that in English.
That's it, and then we're going to try and do that for the rest of the session. Maybe after talks, we'll just do something. It might just be in English. We'll see how it goes. So felly, fel mae'n siŵr da chi wedi gweld, mae'r diwrnod wedi ei rannu fewn i 2 darn. Mae gen ni sesiwn pnawn yma, a dwi ddim yn mynd i siarad gormod am hwnna ar hyn o bryd, ond mae hwnna'n mynd i fod yn cymryd lle o 2 o'r gloch ymlaen. Felly bore yma, da ni'n mynd i gael sesiwn gobeithio, bydd ni'n gorffen o gwmpas amser cinio, a wedyn mae gennym ni'r darn extra y taith tywys o gwmpas y ddechrau'r oes yr haearn. So fydd y fideo yna ar YouTube, a ydych chi'n gallu clicio arno fo yn ystod amser cinio. So just i roi dipyn bach o flavour o beth sydd yn y cyflwyniadau bore yma. Dwi'n siŵr da chi wedi gweld y crynodeb yn barod. Ond da ni'n edrych ar y themau o gwmpas effaith Covid-19 yn archaeoleg, a hefyd o gwmpas materion o cynrychiolaeth yn fudo a gwladychiaeth. So it's just worth, oh, sorry, Stuart, there we go. You're going to do the English bit.
I don't mind, Thomas. You're equally proficient both ways. So yeah, just to mention that the event's going to be split into 2 parts. We've got the morning session that we're just about to get started now. That's going to run until, as Thomas says, until about hopefully 12 o'clock when we'll be wrapping it up. It's going to finish with a Q&A at the end. So so please do, if you're interested in one particular session but want to kind of skip ahead, do join us for the Q&A at the end, which will cover all of this morning's session. So that's going to be at about 11:20 to 12 thereabouts, depending on obviously the rest of the timings. This afternoon session is going to start again at 2 o'clock, and that's going to run for another couple of hours, finishing at 4. So hopefully be all wrapped up today at 4 o'clock. The great thing with this being on YouTube is if you are a little bit late coming to it, you can always watch it a little bit on catch up, and it will be up. We're going to leave the full live stream for the whole thing up on YouTube as long as it's going to be up there. But also we'll be putting each of the videos up separately. So if you just want to come back and watch a particular presentation after today, I'm not sure exactly whether it'll be straight away after the event or whether it'll be later on after the day. We'll put those videos on separately so you can kind of view those as independent kind of bits and pieces. So just to make you aware, if you do want to come back to it, it's going to be there for hopefully quite some time to come. So we've got 4 presentations this morning, and we're going to be exploring some matters that are relevant to the archaeological sector, heritage sector presently, looking particularly firstly at the impact that COVID-19 has had on the heritage sector, but then also a couple of sessions looking at the issues that are impacting on the much wider heritage sector this year, looking at diversity, representation, colonialism, and how they impact particularly on heritage in Pembrokeshire. So just a couple of sessions looking at some of those issues. Now, all the sessions today have been recorded in advance, which is great because it's more stress-free for everybody involved. But it does mean that they're all already recorded, already preset.
Felly, gadewch i ni ddechrau gyda'n cyflwyniad cyntaf. Dwi yn un o'r bobl ar ei cynhyrchu y cyflwyniad yma hefo Cathy Laws o'r Council for British Archaeology Wales. a i ni comisiynu arolwg yn edrych ar effaith Covid-19 ar y sector archaeolegol yn Cymru, o ganlyniad i'r lockdown cyntaf. Wrth gwrs, da ni mewn ail-lockdown ar hyn o bryd. Felly, fel da ni wedi sôn yn barod, os mae gennych chi unrhyw cwestiynau, cofiwch postio rhain i'n bocs o sylwadau ni ar YouTube, a bydd Sophie yn casglu heina. Neu, os da chi'n gallu gwneud hynna, gewch chi gyrru fewn cwestiwn i archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk a fyddai yn monitro hynna. A gobeithio, fyddwn ni'n gallu ateb mor gymaint a sy'n bosib, ond wrth gwrs, mae'n dibynnu ar amser. Okay.
So there we are. So without further ado, we're going to get our first talk started. So this talk looks at the results of a survey that was examining the impact of COVID-19 and particularly the lockdown that had on the archaeological sector in Wales. So the presentation, you will see Tomos again. The presentation was produced by Tomos in partnership with Cathy Laws from the Council for British Archaeology Wales. So as Tomos, you probably heard Tomos mention then, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the comments box, or if you want to email, you can email archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast, that's all word, pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk to drop us a question. We're going to be compiling all those questions, and then Tomos and Cathy will be available in the Q&A at the end of the session. So we're going to get our first talk ready now and should be nearly ready to run.
Good morning everyone and welcome. My name is Cathy Laws and I am the Membership Secretary for the Wales Regional Group of the Council for British Archaeology.
And I am Thomas Jones. In addition to being the Community Archaeologist for the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority, I am also the Chair of the Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers Cymru, or Algaw Cymru for short.
It is a joy to be able to talk to you this morning at this difficult time, and I would personally like to thank the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park for having the foresight to set up this event virtually. We are going to present to you this morning a summary of the results of a survey carried out earlier in the year, which gathered information about the impact of the initial COVID-19 lockdown across the archaeological sector in Wales. I will now hand you over to Thomas to give you the background to the survey.
Before I present the results of the survey to you, I think it's really useful for me just to give you a bit of background about why we commissioned this survey and why we thought it was a benefit. So back in June 2020, a similar survey was commissioned by the Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers UK. And what Algaw UK were trying to do was basically see what impact the lockdown was having on the archaeological services within a local authority framework. As part of responses to that survey, all local authorities in Wales were represented, either directly in the case of national park authorities and indirectly where Welsh archaeological trusts responded. Unfortunately, there was some confusion regarding how and who should respond to that survey. As a result, and after discussion with the Council for British Archaeology Wales, we decided it was actually beneficial for us to rerun a joint CBA Wales and Algaw Cymru survey, which not only looked at the local authorities in Wales, but also the sector more broadly. And through doing that, we hoped to overcome some of the earlier issues by clarifying how and who should be responding to the survey. So it was a survey that was open to a more broad range of the sector, so it included community groups, societies, public, private, third sector. So it's really broad, and we hoped it would be really beneficial in terms of seeing exactly what was happening as a result of the lockdown. So the call went out between July and August 2020 for people to complete that survey, and it was available bilingually, and we decided to use Google Forms as our platform. So in terms of the number of responses we received, this was 25 in total. Now, one point that is good to highlight is the fact that whilst 25 does not sound like a very high number, what we need to remember is that Wales's archaeological sector is relatively small. So what you're seeing here is two charts, and one's a pie chart, and this pie chart is showing you where these organisations, societies or community groups, where they actually operate within Wales. And what you can see is there's generally a fairly even split. So we can say that the responses are actually covering the whole of the operating area of Wales. It's worth noting that there is a slight increase when it comes to the southwest, but generally it's really positive that we can see that we have that even split. And then if you look at the types of organisations, again, it's really positive that we have a broad representation. So we've got the businesses including contractors. We've got charitable trusts or not-for-profits. We've got public services, government and local authority. We've also got societies, and then we've got community groups, museums, galleries, and educational institutions. And we can see that we have a significant proportion of businesses, not-for-profit and local authorities responding, but also we can see that societies are responding. So whilst some of the organisations or the type of organisations represented, there's not as many, it's still positive that we have got that broad spectrum. So one of the areas that the survey explored was the impact at an organisational level. So what you can see here are two charts. So one is delivery of service and the other is the use of services during the lockdown. In relation to the delivery of services, we can see that the lockdown had a significant impact on those who responded. Almost 3/4 of those providing response stated that they were only able to operate at partial capacity. This means the lockdown did have some form of impact in terms of their delivery. In addition, we can see that 4% responded that they couldn't operate at all. So this means the lockdown effectively stopped their operations. Encouragingly, we can see that almost 1/4 did respond that they were able to operate at full capacity. So in some way, this is telling us that despite a significant impact on many organisations, community groups, societies, there is some positive that we can see that there is a degree of resilience within the archaeological sector in Wales. Equally, if we look at the chart presenting the results for use of service during lockdown, we can see that the lockdown had a significant impact in the case of many of these organisations, societies and community groups. Whilst it is positive that we can see that over half state that usage remained the same, and also a small proportion reported that they had seen an increase in usage, we can see that 44% stated that there was a decrease in the use of their services. So just carrying on with looking at the impact at the organisational level, what these two charts are showing is the impact on staff. So what we can see in the first one is that we can see that despite the lockdown, over half of those who responded to our staffing responses are saying that actually that the staffing level remained the same. Concerningly, during lockdown, what we see is that actually almost half are saying that actually there's partial furlough or there's complete furlough or some degree of furlough going on. So, we can see that there is some impact at the staffing level. But what we are actually seeing is that in terms of furlough, the biggest proportion is actually that people are on partial rather than complete or almost complete. And we can see also that during the lockdown, no staff were redeployed. So sort of going side by side with that, those organisations with those staff responsibilities, they also responded to the question of whether there were any support measures in place for staff. And that relates to things like health and well-being, and of course, helping people cope with the lockdown situation. And we can see that a significant proportion of organisations did put some supporting measures in place, with over half of those who responded saying that they did. So the last part of the impact at an organisational level section of the survey looked at meetings, whether they were held and how they were held. So what we've got here is two charts. We've got one which is type of meeting, and the other one is virtual platforms used. So looking first at the types of meetings, we can see that the majority of meetings during lockdown were held virtually or over the phone. Interestingly, we can also see that some organisations actually held meetings in person, and we've also got some liaising going on via email. There's also a proportion of meetings that did not take place as a result of lockdown. So we can see that virtual is the most frequent way that meetings were held during lockdown. And if we look at the second chart, which is virtual platforms used, we can see that a number of different platforms were used by different organisations, community groups and societies. What we can see is Zoom is by far the most popular, followed by Microsoft Teams. What will be interesting to see is going forward, do meetings take place more frequently virtually than in person, which was generally taking place prior to lockdown. So the second part of the survey looked at the impact of the lockdown at the work and activity level. And as part of that, we identified 24 areas 24 areas of work and activity that take place in archaeology. And what you're being presented with here is a stack bar chart, and it represents the type of impact on those specific areas of work and activity. So the blue represents cases where delivery has taken place as normal. The orange is where delivery has occurred, but it has taken place with some restrictions. And the third, the grey, represents where delivery has not taken place and has had to be suspended as a result of lockdown. Now, what's really interesting about the results is that we can see a pattern emerging. So what we can see is that those areas with high degree of social contact have been affected the worst. So we can see here that public engagement events, community surveys, excavations, and community projects, we can see that there, the majority of organisations that carry out this type of work activity, they are responding that they've had to suspend those particular work and activity. In contrast, what we can see is in the case of activities where there's less social contact, or where you can carry on that work without needing to meet others, we can see that that the majority of those who deal with those kind of work activity, they have actually been able to continue as normal. So, for example, we can see reports, newsletters, and publications, they have been produced as normal without any restrictions, and we can see that over 60% have reported that. The final aspect of the survey looked at the medium to long-term impact that the lockdown and COVID was likely to have on organisations, community groups and societies. I'll now hand over to Cathy, who will present these results and also explore lessons learned and also provide our conclusions.
Organisations were asked to comment on the medium to long-term legacy that the COVID-19 lockdown would have on various aspects of their services and activities. We defined medium term as 1 year and long term as 5 years. They were asked to state whether they thought each aspect would increase, would remain stable or would decrease. The results are shown on this slide, and you can see quite clearly that the blue bars at the top of the chart suggest that a large proportion of respondents anticipated an increase in the demand for digital content and delivery in relation to site visits, community outreach and day-to-day delivery of services and activities. Roughly 80% of respondents across all 3 areas anticipated an increase in these aspects. A significant number of respondents reported, however, that they felt they were likely to be doing less overall in the way of community outreach and physical site visits. This somewhat mirrors and contradicts the responses relating to digital delivery. In the case of physical site visits, 50% of respondents thought these would decline. This might suggest that organisations see the virtual site visits supplementing rather than replacing those visits that would have previously been undertaken in person. In the case of community outreach, the results suggest that 47% saw this as declining. This clearly contradicts the anticipation that demand for digital engagement in community outreach would increase. This disparity may be due to the fact that at the time of the survey, organisations were not entirely clear how they would be able to deliver community engagement activities, were still adapting to a fast-moving situation, or did not make the link between the two. Perhaps most concerning, demonstrated by the grey bars at the bottom of the chart, is the anticipated significant decrease in income and budgets, 60% of respondents, and in those wanting to volunteer, 50% of respondents. Organisations were also asked to comment more generally about the main lessons learnt so far by the COVID-19 situation and what would help them to recover. Respondents seem to have embraced change and have found ways and means of continuing with many of their services and activities. They are really determined to carry on. It is evident that many services and activities can be delivered in an alternative format. While this change requires commitment, delivery by digital or virtual means is not seen as having a detrimental impact on ways of working. People have learnt fast to adapt to virtual working. Indeed, the positives of virtual working have been recognised. In particular, the ability to carry out meetings virtually has been seen as a way to save time, reduce travel costs and environmental impact, and to improve quality of life. The meetings have also tended to be more efficient and shorter. This seems to be something people want to retain going forward. Investment of time, money and training is needed to adapt to new ways of working. People were keen to develop more skills and purchase equipment to help with digital delivery of projects. Good communication and keeping in touch is recognised as being key to mental health and well-being. Organisations have been really inventive about keeping in touch with staff, volunteers, members and communities. As well as more formal meetings conducted virtually, there have been virtual coffee mornings and chat groups. Regular newsletters have been circulated and links sent out to online wellbeing resources, training, lectures and quizzes, etc. Despite the general acceptance of this new virtual world, however, it is evident that people do miss day-to-day contact with their colleagues and friends, and people also value access to the outdoors. As one respondent commented regarding engagement, "You can't beat physical engagement, handing round a piece of pottery, physically standing on a site." In conclusion, it is evident that almost all organisations were impacted by the initial lockdown in some way. but community-based and outreach activities which involve a high level of social contact, whether run through societies or professional organisations, were hardest hit. Overall, the sector showed great resilience, embracing change and finding ways and means of continuing with many services and activities via remote working. It is clear that embracing digital technology has been significant in carrying on and is key to the way forward. We have all started to become experts in digital communication platforms in both our personal and professional lives. The survey was completed at a time of great uncertainty. We have since had to contend with local restrictions and now a national lockdown in Wales. Despite this, discussion with colleagues would suggest that a way forward is being paved. Even during the first lockdown, organisations were investing in new technology and developing outreach strategies and volunteer programmes that were fit for a more digital future. And perhaps the event today is a great example of how far we have come. It would therefore be useful to rerun the survey to gauge how thinking has progressed once things have become clearer in terms of the direction of the pandemic. Employers acknowledged that the furlough scheme had helped retain staff through the initial lockdown. However, they see the need to develop more skills and purchase equipment to help with digital delivery of projects. Additional government funding is essential if continued staffing stability and service provision is to be maintained. Societies are keen to see increased availability of grants to help with their activities. The need for clear guidance is also apparent, both in relation to future local and national lockdowns and their implications, and also in relation to new ways of working. Despite the need to change, the survey has highlighted that we should not lose sight of our physical connection with people and place. Archaeology is a great contributor to this and should be retained irrespective of other changes and adaptations. It has, and always will, add to people's health and well-being.
Cathy and myself would like to take this opportunity to thank those who provided a response to the survey, and also for the support of our respective committees. In addition, we thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to us present these results. If you would like to see the full details of the results, these will be available in due course in the forthcoming publication of Archaeology in Wales, Volume 59. Thank you.
Brilliant.
So there we go, Stuart. We've had our premiere there on YouTube.
Brilliant, brilliant. I was just watching it and thinking there's probably lots of people who might work in the heritage sector that might be watching, and a lot of what was said in there is going to really have resonated with people. I know, sort of looking through it, you know, there's lots of things that you kind of, even if you're not working specifically in the field of archaeology, I guess there's probably lots of things that people will recognise in those results there. So it's really interesting that they're kind of being brought together in that way. So no, it's brilliant work, and I'm sure we'll get some interesting questions about kind of perhaps how we sort of seek to move forward in this situation. You know, I think especially because the situation was so fast moving, as you mentioned in the presentation, so fast moving earlier in the year, people perhaps who, you know, did the survey in May or June, you know, might not have had an understanding of where we were going to be here in November, and you know, it's looking likely that into next spring and early summer, perhaps even our working habits are going to be, you know, still very, very different. I'm mindful that we are kind of running over the time a little bit, so I want to
slightly.
Yeah, so I was going to.
Shall I just quickly introduce the next one?
If you do the Welsh and I'll do the English, and then we'll run straight into it.
If anybody does have any questions about the talk we've just had, feel free to throw them in. And of course, I'm here, and Cathy will be joining us in the live Q&A a little bit later on. So anyway, so I will go on now. I'll introduce the next talk. Felly, mae'r sgwrs nesaf ni gan John Ewart sydd yn cefnogi ni heddiw, a mae o'n mynd I fod yn cyflwyno ar ymgysylltu mewn archeoleg, yn defnyddio medrau digidol, a mae John wedi bod yn gweithio hefo Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales, ar ei prosiect Chariot I datblygu adnoddau ar-lein, a dwi'n meddwl hefo Covid, mae o'n, mynd i bod yn mwy a mwy pwysig bod gen i adnoddau fel hyn. Felly eto, unrhyw cwestiynau, rowch nhw ar y channel, neu gyrwch nhw mewn e-bost i archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk.
That's it. So you probably picked that up, any Welsh speakers out there, but for those who didn't, John Ewart from Planed, my colleague John Ewart from Planed, will be doing the next presentation. This is about a project that John's been working on with Cenedlaethol Cymru, National Museum Wales, about the chariot burial that was found in Pembrokeshire a couple of years ago. And this particular presentation is looking at how we are looking to interpret, working with National Museum Wales to interpret the finds of that excavation and that project. So again, as Thomas mentioned, if you've got any questions, stick them in the comments bar. This is a fascinating presentation. It's about the interpretation, though it should underline, emphasize that we were not in a position to give any further information about the actual excavation itself. So I'm sure people might have questions about that chariot burial, but we're not in a position to answer questions around the chariot itself. This is purely about the interpretation project. We can obviously see if we can put those questions to National Museum Wales, but we're not going to get an answer from them today, I don't think. So questions in the comments bar or to archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk, and we're going to try and respond to those. John's going to join us for the Q&A. So here's the film. Thanks, John.
Hello, my name's John Ewart. I work for Planed. I work with communities on digital projects. My talk's all about engagement, how archaeologists can engage with the public, particularly in this time of restrictions and lockdowns. I was lucky enough to work with the National Museum of Wales on the excavation of the Iron Age chariot last year, 2019. Around about March, we arrived at the site with a group of students from Pembrokeshire College, and it was their task to film the excavation, talk to the volunteers, talk to the archaeologists, and make a short film about the excavation of the chariot itself, and then follow it through to talk to some people about the conservation process at places like the Welding Institute, and then on to the National Museum site in St Fagans and Central Cardiff as well. That went well. It was very interesting. The young people were fascinated with the whole process, and actually gave a presentation of the work from March 2019 through to October of the same year at Archaeology Day in the Merlin Theatre last year. In the original funding bid, the National Museum of Wales were going to finish off the engagement with the public on the findings that they had produced as part of this excavation and conservation through the medium of a drama. Working with small theatre groups, local theatre groups, to produce something that would show their interpretations of the site in an accessible way. Now, of course, that couldn't happen. It became very obvious that that wasn't going to happen March, April time of this year, 2020. And so we were thinking about different ways in which we could make those findings accessible to people, but then also to fulfill the engagement part of the original bid. So a small subgroup was created from the original Cenedlaethol Cymru chariot project group, and this was just to do with the engagement. And it was decided that we would make an online resource. In fact, what I wanted to do was to make something akin to going to a glass cabinet at St Fagans and seeing the artefacts there and having that same sense of wonder as to what was going on. And yes, there would be expert information by the side, but the gut feeling, the real engagement would be the person standing in front of that artifact and how they react to it. I wanted to try and recreate that with this online resource. I've gone for a very simple look on purpose. It's not a standard website in that there's no beginning, middle and end to it. I wanted people who were using this resource to start to think a bit like an archaeologist. I wanted them to discover and to dip in and out of the different articles at their own, according to their own interest and their own whim, to get their own sort of results out of it. So I've been careful not to impose any interpretation or analysis from experts on here. Each one of these articles will, if you click on it, will take you into either
So this is a very particular kind of late Iron Age sword.
A short video, which has got subtitles on it. There is a small description underneath just saying what's in the video. Each video is no longer than 2 minutes. This one's 1.5 minutes. You could, some of the articles though, for example this one came from Ddiwrnod Archaeological Trust, and it's a description of a technical drawing that was made after the excavation, and this is a technical drawing actually of two of the tyres in their pits. I've recorded Ken.
This is a drawing or drawings of the 2 chariot wheels elevations,
and also included a transcript of what he says in there. So it's just the drawing and Ken describing it. The third type of article is this one. Now this one came from Dr. Melanie Giles from University of Manchester, and it's actually from a fact sheet on Iron Age chariots. So she describes in a very engaging popular science type of way about chariots and different chariot excavations around the country, and some of their sort of ideas of what they might have been used for. This is as close to interpretation as I get. You can notice on here, on each one of these, that there are some blue keywords, and these are important. This is as much structure as I've got in here. So, for example, you can click on one of these topics, and these are the different topics in there. There is going to be a fourth one, which is going to be about technical skill required as well. So, for example, you could choose something like excavation, and you will get all the articles relating to the excavation. Or you don't have to go into that one there. You could click on conservation here, and again, you get all the items, all the articles to do with conservation. Of course, this is bilingual, so there is a Welsh site, exactly the same. So, for example, we'll go into one of these for Ken's. Now, again, Ken's talking about this post-excavation technical drawing. I still have Ken describing it.
Yeah, so what you see here is a plan we made or compiled.
Now, of course, when I recorded Ken, he was speaking in English, but I've had it translated. So on the Welsh site, there is a transcript of what Ken says in Welsh. And it's been important to have everything as close to, they mirror each other. On here, we have, now here's Mike Smith, he's the finder, and we have the title and a slight sort of a small introduction here.
The benefit of going into the ploughed fields or deep ploughed fields is...
So, of course, Mike is talking in English, but we've got Welsh subtitles on this one. The most important thing that I've got on here, to my mind, is that this menu item called "What do you think?" Now, I'm aiming this mainly. This is for maybe use in schools or colleges, where you could think they've got some very simple questions, simple to ask, but really hard to answer. So just a simple one: who was buried in the ground? The ultimate answer is that they don't know. The archaeologists don't know, but you can think about maybe that there was a sword there, some of the other finds that were buried in the vicinity, and then looking at the excavation as a whole. When was this chariot used? Again, there was no carbon dating at the time of the excavation, but you can talk about in comparison with other chariots, the chariot wheels that were made, and again some of the ditches and some of the finds that were made in the ditches. I've wanted, again, to get the people who are using this resource to think about, to come up with their own interpretations, but also underline, without spelling it out, to say that there is no hard and fast answer. It's always a best estimation as to what they think is going on there, in the light of other excavations and other finds. Now, of course, the whole point of this resource is engagement. It's being able to talk about the excavation, the conservation, and the finds that were made outside of the National Museum. Now, this can be to engage the public, but it is also, it's something that can be used to prove engagement to funders. So we're kind of hoping that this is something that could be used to build, on which to build bids for future funding. So we've got the organisations who are involved with making the resource, but then also different groups that have been involved with the development of this resource in itself. There is I've got evidence that from feedback from different people that they have used that, but also this, just by having it here within the resource, shows that engagement is part of the actual resource in itself. Finally, I've developed the resource as it is because I'm hoping that it will never be finished. It's quite straightforward to add another article. You can just put another one in. All the other cards will just shift along to make way for the new card. So as there are new findings or new interpretations, or even just comparisons with other excavations, they can be added just to add to the whole interpretation of the actual excavation in itself. So you see, that's what we've got so far. It's not open to the public just yet, because it is part of the National Museum of Wales's online resources, and of course it has to be seen to reach certain standards before it can be made public. Standards such as the Welsh translations. Do they fit with all the other artifacts that they have online? It is going through that process at the moment. So at the time that I am filming now, it is not public, but it will be. It will be. The nice thing about it is that it hadn't been planned to make such a thing. Like today, like this Archaeology Day, it's different to how it was last year. We can't have engagement in the way that we did in 2019. We can't have the Merlin Theatre with people sitting side by side and have the experts up there on stage just meters away, and you can fire questions at them. But I think from this adversity, from this lockdown, some good things have come out. I wouldn't have made this resource, it wouldn't have been there. And I think we've actually got something that could be very useful for engaging with local history groups, but certainly with schools. Right from the start, the primary schools in the local area, some of the secondary schools in the local area, and the college have been involved in the process of developing this resource. The college has been there from the beginning in that they took the videos and it was them that made the interviews. After that, I have spoken to some of the local primary schools to see how would you use it? How would you use it with Year 5, for example, in the classroom? And then in the secondary schools, how would a secondary school use this with the new curriculum coming in? So although this wasn't planned those years ago when the bid was made, I think something has very useful and something quite special has come out of it. And likewise, with today, with the Archaeology Day, we don't know how it's going to go. We don't know whether it's going to run smoothly or we're going to have little hiccups on the way, but it is something new, and hopefully something lasting may come out of this. I'm not saying this is going to replace everything. The resource isn't going to replace the glass cabinets, and it's certainly not going to replace St Fagans. And today is not going to replace Archaeology Day as it was in the past. But we are learning some new things, and we are learning what new ways in which the public and the academics and the scientists can engage with each other, and it's interesting. There are interesting times ahead.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, it's an amazing video, amazing piece of work that John's done. It's just worth saying, actually, that John, who you saw there, who will be joining us for the Q&A later, is the technical brains behind this whole event. So, so he was referring to Archaeology Day because not only has he been working hard the last few months on that particular digital resource, he's also been propping Tomos and I up in doing virtually everything technical behind the scenes for today's event. So we are hugely in John's debt for that. We couldn't do it without him. Brilliant piece of presentation. A couple of quick points that I was going to make. And one of the questions has come up in the comments. But before I say that, there was a little technical issue at the very start of playing that video, so just apologies for that. As we have mentioned, we're all learning this, we're all new to this, so apologies for that little technical hitch at the start.
Stuart, I was just going to say, really, it's an example of those hiccups that John conveniently mentioned in his video, and you know, we are learning, but hopefully most people got most of that video.
So hopefully that didn't hopefully it didn't impede on anybody's experience of viewing the video. They got the chance to see the results. The question he's put in chat up in the chat box. The question that came up on the comments, and obviously please do add a question in the comments bar, and we will come to it in the Q&A. If we we'll compile them all and come to it in the Q&A, the live Q&A at the end. John will be joining us there. But the question that came up that's worth just addressing very quickly is a lot of people are asking, when is this website available? When will it be live? When can we see it? John's going to come to that in a little bit more detail at the end, but it's not live at the moment. There's a few technical bits and pieces, fact checking. I know National Museum are keen to embargo some of the information because they're waiting for the release of other pieces of information. So there's a process with this academic stuff, particularly because there's a little bit of secrecy around the site, and as John mentioned in the video, making sure the translations are accurate, making sure that they've passed National Museum's very high, very rigorous standards. So that, you know, they're very thorough in their work, but sometimes these things can take a little bit of time. I think originally when we were planning this, we'd hoped that the website would be there for people to look at today, but it was always going to be slim, always going to be narrow. So we'll come to that a little bit more in the Q&A. We're going to move on, I think, to the third talk. Thomas, I didn't know if you wanted to just say a little bit about that in Welsh first.
Yeah, I can do. Felly, mae'r sgwrs nesaf yn edrych ar sut rydyn yn dehongli tystiolaeth a straeon mewn archaeoleg, a sut mae hyn yn newid dros amser. Praen twrsyniadau sydd gan ni sy'n cael ei dylanwad yn y dehongliadau rydyn yn creu am y gorffennol. So mi fydd rhywun oleuni Fydd hi'n cyflwyno ac yn edrych ar materion yma ac yr esiampl o helwyr a casgwyr ar safle Mesolithic Nabs Head. Eto, os mae gen chi cwestiynau I rywun, rowch nhw yn y chat box, neu gyrwch e-bost fewn I archaeology@pembrokeshirepost.org.uk.
Brilliant. So this is another talk looking at one of the big issues that's come to the heritage sector in 2020. Moving away from COVID-19 though this time. This one is going to look at how we tell stories of our past and how we interpret evidence of our past. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Rowan Alaney is talking about how we look at representations of hunter-gatherers. We're particularly looking at the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers in Pembrokeshire. So without further ado, if you've got any questions, don't forget, post them in the comments bar or email archaeology@pembrokeshirecoasts.org.uk. Here's Rowan. Thank you.
Nab Head near St Bride's, and what better place to come to think about the Mesolithic. Here, 10,000 years ago, sea levels were much lower. Nab Head wasn't a sea cliff, but a hillside with a view overlooking a low-lying coastal plain. Instead of spotting seals, we might have glimpsed bears, deer, or aurochs in the distance. My name is Rowan Allain. I'm an interpretation officer at Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority. I'm going to talk about a project that I began working on with our community archaeologist Tomos Jones last autumn. Tomos and I put our heads together to redevelop the archaeology display at Archaeoleg Parc, the National Park's Discovery Centre and Gallery in St David's. There you'll find a rather plain display case, which doesn't do quite enough justice to some fantastic prehistoric finds handed in to us by members of the public. These include a couple of aurochs horns found at Newgale and White Sands after winter storms, as well as an awesome example of a Neolithic axe that a farmer from Dinas one day plonked down on the counter at Castell Cenedlaethol, asking the amazed member of staff, "So what do you think of that?" When we started to talk about what to do with this display of prehistoric archaeology, Tomos and I noticed that it was lacking anything from the Mesolithic period. We wanted to put that right, because Pembrokeshire has this amazing Mesolithic archaeology eroding out of the coastline all the time. Think of the child's footprints left in the peat layer of the submerged forest at Lidstep, or the area around Newport Bridge on the Nevern Estuary, where a cluster of flint cores and blades were found in the 1920s. And of course, here at Nab Head, where hundreds of small shale beads were uncovered, alongside other intriguing artefacts, dating to around 10,500 years ago. We wanted visitors to really connect with these stories, and through that connection start to consider how their behaviour and the impact of climate change affects coastal archaeology. But there's more to it than that. We talked about the possibility of adding items to the display, including some of the Nab Head beads, and I suggested we include some interpretation of how they might have been worn, and the people who wore them, the people here at the time, the Western European hunter-gatherers. Last autumn, when Tomos and I began talking about the project, the Amgueddfa Cymru National Museum of Wales's excellent Stones and Bones exhibition was still up in the main gallery space at Archaeoleg Parc. One of the images used in that exhibition was the Nab Head illustration by Giovanni Caselli from 1979. We both felt, though, that there was something a bit off about this image and that it had become outdated in a number of ways. From this came the idea of producing a new illustration giving a more up-to-date representation of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. Before I talk about the illustrations in more detail, I want to give you some background and touch briefly on the importance of equality and accessibility in our work. As a heritage interpreter, I believe passionately that the stories we tell about the past and the ways we tell them are of vital significance to the well-being of our communities here, to our futures, and to the wider world. The influential cultural theorist Terry Eagleton once wrote, and I quote, "The past holds vital resources for the renewal of the present. Those who wipe out the past are in danger of abolishing the future as well." End quote. Our work in the National Park Authority is guided by the Welsh Government's Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. This gives us a duty to embed equality throughout our work, and the arrows in this graphic show the link between equality and all our other management goals for culture and heritage, for sustainability, prosperity, health and well-being, global responsibility, communities, and so on. So this is why these days you'll see the National Park Authority places a great emphasis on engagement and trying out new ways of working that foster access and opportunities for everyone. Talking about heritage interpretation specifically, I see a clear relationship between equality and the stories we tell. And there is a link in that to the growing movement to decolonise the culture and heritage sector, which coincidentally has greatly accelerated with global events this year. Because decolonisation is a term usually used to refer to undoing colonisation by European empires around the world, which postdates the Mesolithic quite significantly, I have been asking myself if, why, or should I apply the term decolonisation to our interpretation of the Mesolithic. And no, I'm not saying we should dismantle Pentref and go back to being hunter-gatherers. So why have I chosen this term? Well, colonial ideas have often shaped our understanding of the past, and, I'm about to argue, they shaped how Western European hunter-gatherers were represented in modern times. And I'm not just talking about these guys. Although the term decolonisation means the undoing of colonialism, it also often refers to confronting the ways of thinking that gave colonialism its power, ways of thinking that are still present in our society and institutions today. Frantz Fanon, a seminal voice in decolonisation in the 1960s, wrote, and I quote, "Imperialism leaves behind germs of rot which we must clinically detect and remove from our land, but from our minds as well." End quote. As Eleanor Newbigin, a history lecturer at SOAS in London, claims, and I quote, "European colonial practice was built on racialised, gendered hierarchies. European people, or to be precise, able-bodied, heterosexual white men, were held to be the most developed on the globe. They were the drivers of modernity and progress, while all others were the inert and docile recipients of their civilised dynamism. A decolonised history explores how these ideas emerged and continue to shape our understanding of not only the world under European empire, but also before that." End quote. Writing in The Ecologist, poet Louisa Joa Parker argues that the decolonisation of the museum sector, and I quote, "can be viewed as part of a wider movement to dismantle old, oppressive systems and tell a wide range of counter-stories, those of working class people, women, black, Asian and minority ethnic people, LGBTQ people, and people with disabilities." End quote. So, decolonising culture can be seen as more than returning the Elgin marbles to the Parthenon. It's also about confronting the colonial mindset that shapes cultural institutions. It's about rethinking how stories about the past are told, as well as how we make our cultural spaces more relevant and welcoming to diverse groups of people. In addition, Paul Gilroy, one of today's leading voices in decolonisation, has said, and I quote, "Decolonising does not mean forsaking the archives of knowledge built up here over centuries. It asks us to approach those treasured and error-strewn forms of knowledge in a new way. We are required to read them even more carefully, always mindful of the historical factors that formed them and eager to supplement them with other perspectives and commentaries. In particular, we want to present the colonisation of this planet as an important period that shaped the conditions in which we now find ourselves." End quote. Whilst the Western European hunter-gatherers who lived here until about 6,000 years ago may not have been directly affected by the days of empire, if I take the long view of it, to me, their story sits at the beginning of the colonial arc. They were the earliest people to return here after the last ice age, possibly the first people to use places like Nab Head, Carn Llidi or Carningli to survey those estuaries and coastal plains that are now underwater, landscapes that undeniably had much greater biodiversity than we have today. Genetic research now shows that the shift to farming was likely to have been as a result of migration and colonisation by people with their roots in the Mediterranean, rather than a process of acculturation whereby hunter-gatherers adopted farming practices. It also tells us that Neolithic populations were later replaced by waves of migration and colonisation from Central Europe, a pattern that continues with the Romans, the Daci, the Normans, etc., which all led up to the age of the British Empire's expansion across the globe. Apologies for this somewhat sweeping and linear account. Significantly for us, though, our modern understanding of the Mesolithic, as seen in the 1979 Nab Head illustration, is a prime example of how the colonial mindset shaped how we view the past. But before I go into more detail, let me tell you a story about something that happened recently. It was the end of summer and I was sat with my mum on the beach at Poppet Sands when this bearded, athletic guy walks past. And Mum says, "That's wonderful to see. We never had that in my day." And here he is. Yes, that's right. He was carrying a baby strapped in a papoose. And what Mum meant was that you never used to see fathers carrying small infants around in her day. And it's funny, isn't it, in the 40 or so years since me and my siblings were babies, how much society's attitudes towards childcare have changed. If we look again at the image from 1979, we can clearly see 1970s society, in which the division of labour is organised along very gendered lines, with women taking care of children, cooking and cleaning in the background, whilst men's work with tools and weapons is foregrounded. It's no wonder that feminism of the late 1960s and 70s viewed the female body as the first colonised territory. Nowadays, it's commonly theorised that such gender-based roles emerged or became more ingrained with the development of farming, so they may not be accurate for our hunter-gatherer community. In our new illustration, we wanted to give a different interpretation of Mesolithic culture, one where roles and tasks perhaps aren't so rigidly drawn along gendered lines. And although there isn't much evidence in the archaeology that says this is how things were, the assumption that women looked after the children while men did the hunting was one we wish to challenge. And I accept this could also reflect the generational differences and societal changes here in the UK between the 1970s and today. But if you look to non-Western cultures around the world, it is possible to see men baby wearing. The Aka hunter-gatherer people in Central Africa share childcare almost equally between father and mother, whilst women also share in the hunting, something that outside observers say seems to contribute towards harmonious relationships. And here's a gentleman in Bhutan, where they measure how well the nation is doing, not in terms of GDP, but in terms of happiness. I don't wish to put forward that this is the correct or only way of viewing the Mesolithic. In fact, there probably was lots of variation in the division of labour and social practices between different communities. Whether or not the hunter-gatherers were as egalitarian as perhaps I'd like to believe is unknowable, but that doesn't mean there isn't value in not falling back on the interpretations that seem to be common sense in the past, but were themselves never bias-free, especially if we aim to promote equality in today's society. Another difference between the Nab Head illustration of 1979 and our illustration of 2020 is how the people look. The 1979 version could be modern white Europeans. In our illustration, they have deliberately dark skin colour and, with the exception of the older woman, dark hair. This reflects a recent shift in scientific understanding of Western European hunter-gatherer genetics. Researchers studying the DNA of Cheddar Man, Britain's oldest nearly complete skeleton of a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer who lived around 10,000 years ago, found that he had the genetic markers of black or dark skin, blue eyes, and dark, wavy or curly hair. This finding is consistent with analysis of DNA taken from Western European hunter-gatherers elsewhere, such as this Swedish woman from 6,000 years ago, interpreted as a shaman by the sculptor who worked on the reconstruction, and a woman in Denmark 5,700 years ago whose DNA was extracted from a piece of birch bark gum that also revealed she had been eating duck and hazelnuts. When I first learnt about the Cheddar Man reconstruction, it was on Facebook, I'm afraid, and I remember being slightly aghast at some of the comments on the story, where people simply couldn't accept that their British ancestor wasn't white like them. I wish I'd had the foresight to take some screenshots to show you. The commentators' core beliefs had been shaken in a prime example of what Fanon refers to as cognitive dissonance. Nevertheless, for now at least, the science points towards a 75% likelihood that our hunter-gatherers had dark to black skin, challenging a previous assumption of whiteness that now appears rather colonial. I don't know about you, but I find this confluence of science and critical thinking quite exciting in the way it challenges us to reinterpret the past. Another big difference in these recent depictions when compared to the illustration from 1979 is that the recent examples consciously want the viewer to connect with the humanity of the people shown. In colonial practices, power was exerted over colonised peoples through dehumanisation in order to exert the superiority of the European race. In the 1979 example, the viewer is a detached observer. It is ethnographic. It fails to do anything to connect us emotionally. It is as if the creator didn't think the hunter-gatherers' personalities were developed enough to relate to each other or to us. So what happened to the Western European hunter-gatherers? We don't exactly know, but they form about 10% on average of the ancestry of British people without recent family history of immigration, although this ancestry probably comes via migrants to Britain in the Bronze Age and later on. Climate change, rising sea levels, biodiversity loss and disease carried by new arrivals from the continent might all have played a part in their disappearance in Neolithic Britain. If this is the case, never has their story been more relevant to today, what with the impact of COVID-19, climate change and biodiversity loss on people all over the world. What might I do differently next time round? Well, we should have thought about including a sling for the baby. I was pleased to work with a female illustrator, Jackie Chadwick, who came recommended to us by one of the curators at Amgueddfa Cymru National Museum of Wales, and who brought with her extensive experience of archaeological illustration, including some of the artefacts from Nab Head. Jackie brought a tremendous amount of energy, was great at listening to and accommodating our ideas, and was also willing to go away and do research of her own, making use of her professional networks. There was quite a bit of toing and froing between drafts. For example, when we felt the people in our version were looking too much like modern Europeans with brown skin, and Jackie adapted accordingly. But I have had a question lurking in the back of my mind about the fully white team working on the project, and wonder if we had employed an artist outside the institutional circuit, how the image might have turned out differently. Could it have been appropriate on this occasion to seek a person of colour to work with, for example? Of course, overall this project was such a tiny contribution towards the task of dismantling colonialism, and I'm sure that both as individuals and as organisations there are ways we can do more. What kinds of conversations do I imagine this illustration might spark in visitors to Awdurdod Parc? I'd hope that they can connect with these people's humanity and see what they have in common. I'd hope that they take inspiration from a time when people's survival was so closely linked to the health of the ecosystems we are part of, and choose to live more sustainably today as a result. I'd hope they feel some pride. I hope it does something to help grow awareness of how Mesolithic hunter-gatherers looked, so that it becomes common knowledge. Then maybe one day we'll get to enjoy some new, more accurate pop cultural depictions of the Mesolithic. Lastly, I hope we in the heritage sector can continue to place equality at the heart of everything we do. Now there's a future worth looking forward to.
Brilliant, brilliant. What an amazing, inspirational talk. He's got some really good feedback in the comments on YouTube. Really grateful for Rowan for all the work in that. Yeah, I mean, we're going to come to some of the issues raised there, perhaps in the Q&A later on. No, I thought it's absolutely breathtaking, really inspirational work. The issue of colonialisation and decolonising heritage has been a big issue for the sector this year. So those people that watching who actively work in the sector will obviously be aware of things in the kind of the press in the sector's kind of journals and press. The Museums Association conference took place this week, and that was over the last 5 days, and there have been lots of sessions there about issues pertaining to representation, diversity, and decolonisation, not just in terms of the way we interpret our heritage, but also looking at the workforce. And obviously, it's really important to mention, Tomos, that perhaps one of the reasons why we have such a single-minded view of the past is because the workforce is, it looks and feels a particular way, and something that we were mindful of when we were kind of trying to put this conference together was, that both you and I, Thomas, both sort of white males, we're not as representative in all the ways that we perhaps might want to be, but we're just two people working in the sector. These are very small steps we're taking here, and we're hoping that, that by trying to shine a light on some of these issues, that we can try and move things forward in a small way, and perhaps include, hopefully we'll include a more diverse team in the build up to next year's Archaeology Day. One of the things that talk raised, which I thought was interesting, was this issue about people sort of looking upon their past and what the nature of their past was, and the fact that they didn't see themselves represented in their past. I think this next talk is going to be quite interesting for some people. I know we don't want to sort of take up too much time because we've got the Q&A that's coming up after this talk. Thomas, do you want to just give it a quick introduction?
Yeah, I will do. And I just wanted to say thanks to Rowan. She worked really hard on that talk, really interesting. And it's interesting for me because when I was an undergraduate, my dissertation was around archaeological theory, and it's all around that practice of being aware of, your world views and how that might shape the way you interpret the evidence. Just on the point of time, just so people are aware, of course, it's on YouTube, and we're going to keep the morning session on there. So we're probably going to slightly overrun slightly because the next talk is just under 30 minutes. That would only give us about 5 minutes to do the Q&A. So we'll probably run over by a slight bit, but if you need to go somewhere, you can come back and you can watch that Q&A. That's the beauty of being on YouTube. We can, people can go back and watch it when they have the chance. But we do apologise that we're slightly running behind. So without pushing it further behind, I'll just do a very quick summary of the next talk. So mae'r sgwrs olaf ole yma yn cario ymlaen thema, da ni wedi gwneud sgwrs Rowan, o gwmpas cynrychiolaeth, a mae Dr Simon Hancock yn mynd i fod yn edrych ar hanes Sir Benfro mewn perthynas â gwadychwr, ymddidwyr a phloduriaid. Ac oedd o bosib sydd wedi cael chai o sylw, ond sydd yn pwnc pwysig iawn. Yn anffodus, fel mae Stuart wedi sôn, dydy Simon ddim yma heddiw i fod yn bresennol yn y sesiwn cwestiwn ag ateb, ond os mae gennych chi cwestiynau, jyst postiwch nhw ar YouTube neu gyrwch nhw mewn e-bost i archaeology@coast.uk, a wedyn o'n i ceisio cael ymateb gan Simon iddo chi. Okay.
Yes, so as Thomas was just saying there, yeah, Tom, this next talk is from a well-known figure in Pembrokeshire. Anyone who works in heritage and history in Pembrokeshire will know Dr Simon Hancock, curator at Hefyd West Museum. He's also a county councillor as well, and a lot of people will know him from his role there. Very well-known historian in the county. Here he's talking a little bit about Pembrokeshire's history with regards to migration and colonists. So very much following on from this idea that Rowan has just introduced in the last talk. As Thomas said, Simon isn't available today, unfortunately, but please do send us your questions on this one. Any important questions or any questions that we feel do warrant a response, we'll try and address in the Q&A where we can, and obviously anything that Simon himself, only Simon himself can answer, we'll see if we can get some responses from him, and obviously try and get those back to people, over the next few days and weeks going forward. So please do pop a question in there. That's in the comments box on YouTube or archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. And here is the video.
I am Dr Simon Hancock. I've been the curator of Haverfordwest Town Museum since April 1998, and I have a passionate interest in all aspects of social history, and especially aspects of Pembrokeshire's history that has been hitherto largely overlooked or forgotten. Colonists, migrants and refugees in the history of Pembrokeshire. We're living through times when an extraordinary number of people around the world are on the move. In 2019, the number of global migrants reached 272 million, as people look for economic opportunities to study or escape from political persecution, terrorism, or indeed climate change. In all this sweeping population change, let us never forget that every experience of an individual or family represents a combination of personal push and pull factors, which causes them to leave their own familiar surroundings to seek a life elsewhere. More recently, we have seen huge numbers of displaced people around the Mediterranean as a consequence of wars in the Middle East, and indeed the consequences of the Arab Spring from 2011. Whether they choose or are forced to move, they all experience the challenges of facing new cultures and languages, and are likely to face open discrimination or other forms of hostility. How has migration shaped and enriched this county, and what have the lasting impacts of these new arrivals been? Economic migration and refugees have in fact been a very significant feature of life in Pembrokeshire over the last 2 millennia. The geographical position of Pembrokeshire, close to Ireland and the wider economic hinterland of Bristol, one of England's largest ports, has ensured that migration and refugees figure more than you might imagine. We must never forget that the Romans were colonists. They arrived around 70 AD and established a tribal capital for the Demetai at Moridunum, Carmarthen, with a smattering of isolated villas and dwellings further west. The identification of a Roman fort at Wiston in 2012 promises even more exciting discoveries in the future. Following the end of Roman rule in West Wales, such as it was with the Romanised Demetai, we see a significant settlement into the county of an Irish people named the Desai, who took advantage of a political vacuum to move into southwest Wales. This migration may have occurred in the 5th century. There were sufficient numbers to establish Irish-speaking populations in the area until the language died out in the 8th century. They are remembered by the bilingual inscribed stones written in Latin and Irish Ogham. An early panegyric comes from the Book of Taliesin, Old Welsh poetry of the heroic age, describes how the kings who were of Irish descent ruled the kingdom of Dyfed, which contained the cantrefs of present-day Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire. Whether this Irish settlement resulted in permanent survival in existing place names is contested, given the phonological co-equivalence between Old Welsh and Old Irish during the 5th and 7th centuries. Heather James writes how there were probably two distinct periods of Irish settlement into the area in the early and late 5th century. While the contacts with Ireland were both consistent and varied, the long coastline, with its creeks and estuaries and mighty Milford Haven waterway, enabled the raids of narrow single-masted ships. These Viking sea raiders appeared suddenly and without warning. Pembrokeshire was a useful staging post in the Irish Sea and Bristol Channel. There was probably small-scale immigration and settlement by Scandinavians as well, and they coexisted and integrated with the native population. There are undeniable Scandinavian forms of place names around the coast, including Skoma, Skockum, Grasholm, Gatehome, Tusker Rock in Jack Sound, and Gosker Rock on North Beach and Denbigh. A convincing argument has been advanced how they influenced the name of Milford Haven itself, Myla Fiord, the fiord with sandbanks. Moreover, there are inland settlement names which contain Scandinavian elements as well, including Wolf's Castle, Farthing's Hook, Skollock, Goltrop and Haygard. The human wave of people who arrived a century later were as keen on plunder as the Vikings, but they were intent on wholesale land acquisition by force from the native Welsh inhabitants. The Normans were opportunists par excellence, and following the death of William the Conqueror in 1087, they moved in from the English border. These Norman incursions brought a military response from Rhysap Tudor, the king of Deheubarth, but he died in battle near Brecon in 1093, and the brakes were then decisively off. According to the Chronicle of the Princes, the Bruti Tywysogion, the French overran Dyfed and Ceredigion, which was not in their power before that, and made castles in them and fortified them. The Normans crossed the Teifi in a swift and probably unopposed thrust. And during the early years of Henry I's reign, both banks of the Cleddau were colonised and secured by the Normans. The process of Anglicisation was continued with vigour by the English colonists who migrated from Devon and Somerset across the Bristol Channel, and as they did so, they transformed the ethnic profile as well as the landscape and the architecture of the region. No act of colonisation contributed so much to the Anglicisation of South Pembrokeshire as the arrival of the Flemish migrants somewhere between 1107 and 1112. They came in successive waves over perhaps several decades. They established a number of planted boroughs, including Whiston, founded by Wiso Flandrensis, while Leitard, nicknamed the Little King, gave his name to Letterston. Tancard or Tancred was perhaps their chieftain, and he is regarded as the founder of the capital of the Flemings, namely Haverford, later Haverfordwest. Giraldus Cambrensis describes the Flemings as a brave and robust people, ever most hostile to the Welsh, a people well versed in commerce and woolen manufacture, a people anxious to gain by land or sea in defiance of fatigue or danger, a hardy race equally fitted for the plough or the sword. Flemish names survive in existing place names in Pembrokeshire today, including Flemington, Castle Flemish, Tancredston and Lambston. They also heavily influenced the dialect of South Pembrokeshire. Even as late as 1914, a dictionary of South Pembrokeshire words and phrases covered some 28 pages. These words were a reflection of Welsh, Norse, English, Norman and Flemish languages. As the number of English immigrants increased during the 12th and 13th century, the Flemish people gradually lost their separate identity, so that the chronicler Ranulph Higden wrote in the 14th century how all traces of their language and identity had been lost. Other sources point to a longer-lasting survival. Lucas de Heer, a Flemish humanist and painter, travelled throughout England and Wales in the 1560s and 70s. He claims to have conversed with people in Pembrokeshire who still spoke Flemish well. The four ancient boroughs of medieval Pembrokeshire, Haverford, Tenby, Pembroke and Newport, were cosmopolitan communities where the prospects of trade and commerce brought people from all over Western Europe. Haverford's property deeds and documents are the finest surviving collection anywhere in Wales and reveal numerous ethnic groups. Here we find Hugh the Fleming and Mabel his wife, one Perkin Graciot, and numerous other French and Flemish names. We find two money-lending Jews of Haverford in 1247 who operated under the king's official protection, while there were also three Norsemen from Haverford whose names are recorded amongst the Ostmen of Dublin in 1200. The Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland in 1169, from which English claims to sovereignty arose, instituted the imbroglio into Irish politics and affairs, which was to last the following 8.5 centuries. Given the short distance between Pembrokeshire and Ireland, some 70 miles or so at its shortest point, the presence of Irish migrants has been a constant in the history of Pembrokeshire. These waves of migrants usually coincided with political disturbance and unrest. Many of these came to escape from war, starvation, poverty, while others sought new opportunities in a more politically settled land. The occasional descent by masses of indigent Irish men stoked fears in local communities, so one of the official responses was to either ship them back to Ireland or to encourage them to move further east, out of the Shire. On the 8th of July 1528, Rhys ap Gruffydd, descendant of the great Sir Rhys ap Tomos, complained to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey how 20,000 Irishmen, for the most part rascals and from the domain of the rebel Earl of Desmond, had landed in Pembrokeshire within the previous year, and he added how the king's town of Tenby is almost clean Irish, as well the headmen to the commons. This was undoubtedly an exaggeration, but 8 years later George Owen, the great Elizabethan chronicler of the county, wrote how every third, fourth or fifth village in Rhws or Castle Martin was an Irishman, and he even went so far as to declare how in some parishes all the inhabitants, apart from the priest, were Irish. They brought with them a taste for whisky, which they distilled in large quantities and which they hawked about. Another wave of Irish came in 1628 and 1629, arriving with passes granted by local Irish officials. Many were transported at 3 shillings a head, and they were unloaded into small creeks and bays where they were hardly likely to encounter the authorities. Some ship owners profited greatly from this human traffic. On one occasion, a ship of 10 tons took over 70 migrants who were crammed into his vessel. This does indeed seem an echo of the human trafficking which is taking place in our own time, where desperate scenes are daily played out in the Mediterranean and in the English Channel. The contribution of black and minority ethnic sailors in building up the trade and maritime commerce of Pembrokeshire ports, especially Milford Haven, will always remain conjectural. The crew list of Victorian and Edwardian vessels allows an analysis of birthplaces of crew members, but this information is simply unavailable for earlier periods. Black sailors must have been on ships of vessels sailing from the West Indies, especially Antigua and Jamaica, which were regularly sailing to Haverfordwest between 1720 and 1760. They would have brought a variety of goods, including that most precious of commodities, sugar, which was one of the financial sinews of the British Empire. Such black people that are encountered in Pembrokeshire records invariably, but not universally, appear due to encounters with the law. Some black people appear as peripatetic entertainers in local fairs. In October 1907, one of them was styled Prince Samud, and he appeared at the Portfield Hiring Fair and gave a marvellous performance, including thought reading and illusions. Earlier, a black member of the Welsh troupe, which exhibited at Herbranston Fair in 1851, was obliged to leave rather quickly through the fear of violence which was expressed against him, and he couldn't take any chances. Most black people came to Pembrokeshire through local ports, since before the advent of the railways in 1853, transportation was long and arduous. Numbers are impossible to ascertain, but it's estimated that nationally 3% of ship crews were probably black, Asian and ethnic minority sailors. Occasionally, they were obliged to commence court action for non-payment of wages. Thus, in November 1847, at the Pembroke Borough's Petty Sessions, J. Ely, who was a black man, of the William Wallace, which was sailing from the East Indies to Pembroke Dock, took legal proceedings against Captain Small for non-payment of his wages. The latter won the action by citing various acts of disobedience. What factor racism might have been in this judgment is impossible to ascertain, but must surely have been some factor. The punishment meted out to Abraham Brown, a black man, at the Borough Sessions in Pembroke in 1862, was harsh even by the standards of the time. He received 6 months with hard labour for stealing 3d worth of hay and some old bones. Black sailors who were discharged from their ships were likely to be picked up for vagrancy. Thus, we find Frederick Fredrickson from St. Cruz in the West Indies. He received a month with hard labour for begging in the back lane in St Mary's Parish, Haverfordwest in 1862. The status of Haverfordwest as an important port with an Atlantic trade ensured that there were significant migrations of individuals from continental Europe. The presence of the only Moravian church in Wales was an indication of these external influences. One such arrival, which was to have important implications for the commercial and financial development of the town, were Samuel and Moses Levi. They were born at Frankfurt in Germany, and they were Jewish brothers who arrived Haverfordwest via Swansea. They were baptised into the Christian faith and assumed the surname of one of their friends and mentors, a man named Phillips. Samuel opened the Haverfordwest Bank in 1783, and it thrived until 1825, when it failed during a national banking panic. Pembrokeshire has been a place of refuge for refugees fleeing rebellions and civil war in Ireland. In 1641, the Great Irish Rebellion saw people fleeing across the Irish Sea with tales of atrocities. The heightened tension of what went on in Ireland considerably increased the political temperature, and the following year the whole of the British Isles was convulsed in civil conflict. The refugees in Pembrokeshire were of course Protestant, and they were allocated £100 by Parliament towards their relief, although we're not sure whether these funds were ever distributed. A little over 150 years later, Ireland was convulsed with the Great Rebellion of 1798. The United Irishmen sought to establish an independent Irish Republic. Only in County Wexford did the rebels achieve any success, taking Enniscorthy and Wexford. Both sides committed atrocities, one of the most infamous occurring at Scullabog on the 5th of June 1798, when 100 loyalists were locked in a barn which was set on fire. British military victories were invariably followed by the massacre of Irish Catholic prisoners. In June, Haverfordwest was filled with unfortunate Irish refugees, including one lady whose husband had been butchered by the rebels. Several vessels came into the town crowded with fugitives, and it was estimated there were between 1,000 and 1,500 refugees in the town. The inhabitants raised funds to feed and house them, including private lodgings and even erecting tents. A plea to the government seemed to attract lukewarm sympathy. The Home Secretary, the Earl of Portland, was more interested in censuring the flight of military officers and clergymen who exposed themselves to accusations of dishonourable and disgraceful conduct in leaving their posts in Ireland than actually providing much by the way of practical help. There seem to have been few refugees from the French Revolution, since Pembrokeshire was not geographically close to the continent, although the occasional Frenchman does appear. Locally, one was an individual named Douvain, who was attracted notoriety by appearing as a second to John James, one of the protagonists in a famous duel fought in September 1799, when Samuel Fortune of Haverfordwest was killed. Pembrokeshire was host at least for a time, for waves of migrants from Ireland, which was devastated by the potato blight in the mid-19th century, between 1845 and 1849. Some 3 million people depended upon the potato as their staple food, and the consequences of the blight, which in 1846 destroyed 3/4 of the crop, were truly devastating. Over 1 million people died, and a further 1 million emigrated, so Ireland's population fell by between 20 and 25%. There was particular anger at how 400,000 Irish people had died of starvation and disease, while at the same time thousands of ships were exporting Irish-grown food to Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow and London. There was also bitter resentment at the attitude of the British government, which spent a mere 0.5% of GDP over a 5-year period in famine relief. About 200,000 of these migrants eventually arrived in Britain. Pembrokeshire witnessed the arrival of famine ships from Ireland. In one recorded case, nearly 300 men, women and children arrived off the coast in April 1848. Their ship was shamefully deserted by the captain near Angle, leaving the people to trudge to Pembroke. Upwards of 100 were housed in a large malt house on the green, and the following morning they were on their way heading east for Newport in Monmouthshire. Technological and transport changes brought their own wave of migrants to Pembrokeshire. The arrival of the railways at Haverfordwest, Neyland, Pembroke Dock and Milford Haven brought dramatic changes in the way in which people lived. The county was opened up as never before, with benefits for the export of agricultural produce, and for places like Tenby, a palpable boost as a tourist destination. A case study in this regard is provided at Neyland, where the railway opened in 1856 and was followed by the inauguration of a steam ferry service to Waterford and Cork. 19th century Neyland had a distinctly Irish character, with numbers of Irish-born residents and prominent Irish people, and it retained this until the Irish boats went north to Goodwick in 1906. For places like Pembroke Dock, whose entire raison d'etre was the establishment of the Royal Dockyard in 1814, there was a significant influx of skilled workers and artisans from the West Country, and in this respect, these migrants were the founders of the dockyard town. In this reflection on the role of colonists, migrants and refugees in Pembrokeshire's history, no chapter provides a more interesting analysis of attitudes to refugees than that of the Belgian colony which made its home in Milford Haven between 1914 and 1919 during the First World War. The German army invaded Belgium on the 4th of August 1914. About 1.5 million, or 20% of the population of Belgium, fled and became refugees, mostly to Holland, which was neutral in the war, and about 250,000 came to Britain at one time or another during the war. Defending the honour and integrity of poor little Belgium became an important reason in explaining why Great Britain was at war. In September and October 1914, some 25 Ostend trawlers arrived at Milford Haven with their crews. Some of them brought family and even household furniture. They were especially welcome, since much of the domestic fleet of trawlers had been taken by the government for minesweeping and anti-U-boat patrols. The immediate arrival seemed to have been better off, and the departure from Belgium less hurried and less desperate than those who arrived a little later. The later refugees came via Folkestone and took the train west. Some students of history remembered the early arrival from the Low Country, that of the Flemings, in the early 12th century, and so they saw the appropriateness of their arrival in Pembrokeshire. Around 1,100 to 1,400 Belgians remained in Milford Haven during the war, and so 1 in 7 of the population of the town was a refugee. Other refugees were housed at Fishguard, Narberth, Tenby, Dinas, Newport and Letterston, but they mostly left by 1915 to seek employment in England. A King Albert school for Belgian children was opened in Milford Haven in 1915 and was staffed by 3 Flemish-speaking teachers. And the exiled community marked the King's birthday and the National Independence Day with colourful spectacles and displays. The relationship with locals was not a universally harmonious one, especially as the war began to bite and casualties soared and the cost of living escalated. There were 2 Belgian fishermen strikes in 1915 and 16, and the accusation was made that the Belgians did not want to work. There was also occasional fights and altercations with locals and stone throwing between Belgian and Milford youths. Nevertheless, there was genuine regret when the Belgians left in March 1919, and the Belgian trawler owners gave a handsome granite memorial to the town as a thank offering. This was unveiled in March 1919. Great Britain's efforts in fighting 2 world wars were aided immeasurably by the active participation in military and logistical spheres by people from across the empire, and indeed many who were no part of it. The Merchant Marine had many black, Asian and Chinese sailors, and they were given sustenance and shelter at the Bethel Sailors' Rest at Milford Haven. During the First World War, it housed the crews of 148 ships, and they'd either been lost by mine, torpedo or storm. One eyewitness account described desperate Chinese sailors walking up Hamilton Terrace barefooted. The crews of neutral vessels could not get home, and so they assisted the war effort in other ways, especially the timber camps at Slebich, Wiston and Nevin. They were a mixture of Finns, Russians, Norwegians, Danes, Dutch, Greeks, Italians and an American or 2. They were employed by the Board of Trade to cut down timber, which was then shipped to the Western Front. Pembrokeshire saw a significant arrival of Russians, mainly Jews, in the summer of 1918. Labour battalions were formed of non-naturalised Russians living in Britain to perform military-related manual labour. And the 9th Labour Battalion arrived at Sgwrs Fort near Neyland, and they were joined by 600 members of the 8th Battalion in October 1918. And a number of these Russian, Latvian, Jewish men stayed after the war and married local women. From late Victorian times, Pembrokeshire's had a significant presence of Italian migrants. They were typically engaged in peripatetic entertainment like organ grinders. We find various names between 1909 and 1918, including D. Palmer Loreto, Albert Corsi, Pascal Vial, Giuseppe Giaconte and Annie Giovanni. Haverfordwest, Pembroke Dock and Tenby all had their Italian restaurants before 1914, and they were operated by a man named Amor Amoretti. He regularly traded on a Sunday, despite licensing laws, and he was sanguine about regularly being fined because, of course, the income he derived on a Sunday was so lucrative. He happily parted with the fine because he was making so much money on the Sabbath. He must have been one of the 20,389 Italians living in the United Kingdom in 1911, and one of the 1,000 that was living in Wales. As an Italian reservist, he closed his Bridge Street Italian restaurant and put up a notice in 1914 saying he would be reopening by Christmas, since peace ought to reign in Europe by then. What a shame. We know, sadly, that was not the case. It was more than 4 years before peace came back to Europe. The Fecci family arrived in Tenby and they opened a successful ice cream parlour in 1935, while in Milford Haven it had its noted Rapiotti, and Trodarod's hairdressing salon thrives to this very day. The Second World War saw another significant arrival of Belgian refugees, and interestingly, some of them were coming to the place of their birth. They'd been born in Milford Haven in 1914-18, they went back to Belgium. In 1914 the Nazis arrived and they find themselves as refugees a second time in the place of their birth. But we also find lots of German and Italian prisoners of war. There were 402,200 German prisoners of war in the UK in 1946, and a large camp on the Haven Road, Haverfordwest, housed around 600 of them. Many were employed in agricultural labour. Of the 25,000 who chose to remain in the United Kingdom after 1947, a considerable number continued to live, work and marry in Pembrokeshire. Likewise, a number of the 76,855 Italian prisoners of war who were in this country in 1943 remained in Pembrokeshire after 1945. Former allies as well as former enemies maintained a strong community identity, but for different reasons. Some German and Italians may not wanted to have returned to their devastated homelands, but many Poles, the thought of returning to a country dominated by communism was simply not an option. Around 200,000 Poles remained in the United Kingdom, and in 1951, 162,339 citizens listed Poland as their birthplace in the decennial census. Modern migrants to Pembrokeshire have been overwhelmingly motivated by economic considerations. The advent of the oil industry brought very large numbers of people into the county. These enterprises brought significant migration from all parts of the country, including Scotland, Ireland, and even overseas. In 2011, around 5,000 people who were born either in the EU or non-EU countries were domiciled in Pembrokeshire. And of course, in the last few years, we've had a few Syrian families have settled in Pembrokeshire under the auspices of the Home Office's Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. By 2018, 7 families had been settled in the county. And of course, very recently, there was the arrival of refugees who were being housed at the Penally training camp near Tenby. The story of Pembrokeshire is a story of migration, of colonists and refugees, one stretching back 2,000 years or more. It's a constant and human experience. We may think we are faced with issues and political discourse unique to our own times, but history tells us something very different.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Oh, my video's gone. Brilliant talk from Simon. And the comments on the YouTube there, just mentioning now what a timely reminder some of that is, and just how much of an impact those waves of migration have had in Pembrokeshire. I'm moving so the sun's not on my mouth. We're going to start the Q&A now. We are a little bit later than we'd anticipated, but we're going to try and get through a few questions, aren't we, Thomas? I think before we kind of get started properly, we're going to perhaps go around and do a quick couple of introductions. It's worth noting we've not had any specific questions that I'm aware of, Thomas, but we've got a couple of discussion points we're going to try and get through. I mean, if we do notice something, I've got the comments up on my other screen over here. If we do notice something come through that is worth a mention, we will try and include it in this Q&A now. Is it worth, Thomas, just us going around introducing everybody? I don't know if you wanted to do the introduction. You have the introductions.
I can do that. I have made a few points, and I know there's some questions that have come up, and some of them have been answered. Again, apologies that we're running slightly late, but like I say, we are on YouTube, so we will keep this morning session up. So if you do have to dash off in 3 minutes' time, then feel free to do so, and you can come back and watch the end. So I'll stop now. I just wanted to say that was really interesting. Loads of topics there. We had COVID-19, and we had like sort of the engagement and the adaptation as a result. Then we kind of had the representation, and we heard a little bit of maybe about a history of Pembrokeshire that is maybe not so well known. As someone who moved here last year to work as the community archaeologist, I certainly have learned a lot, and it's clear that for the last talk, Simon is really knowledgeable. It is a shame he's not here, but if anybody does have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will try and pass them on to. So I'm just going to go around. So perhaps we can start with Kathy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello everybody, I'm Kathy Laws. I'm representing the Council of British Archaeology Wales group today. And
Kathy, we really have worked really hard on that piece of the survey, and it's been an experience for us, hasn't it, having to do this piece of work over Zoom. It really is a new way of working. I don't know if you feel the same.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, but it just proves that you can do it. I mean, we've not met in person at all while we've been working on this, the report that's coming out from the survey that we did. So yeah, but it's been great to be able to present the results today. So
yeah, and it's worth pointing out that we have worked together before, haven't we? Because you're also the National Trust archaeologist up in North Wales, and we've done some work before, and it's strange doing it this way because we've written reports before, but actually in person. So yeah. So it was nice to be able to do something else. So then just moving on my screen, I can see Rowan is next. So Rowan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Rowan Allain, and I'm one of the interpretation team at Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority. There are two of us who are both part-time, and I'm relatively new to the authority. At least I did work at Cenedlaethol a number of years ago, so some of you may know my face and may have seen me knocking around, but I started again in my current role at the end of July last year. So it's been a relatively short time period in post, and just want to say thank you to Tomos really for creating the opportunity to work on such a nice project so early on.
Well, it's been a pleasure to work on it, and I'm really pleased that you've been able to present a talk. And it is, and I know I saw someone else put a comment in about it takes them back to their dissertation or their studies, and it's the same for me because it comes back to that archaeological theory. So yeah, it's been really great. It was a really good talk. So I'm trying not to take up too much time, so we'll come on to John, who he can introduce himself. And I'd just like to say thanks to John. He's been responsible for supporting us this morning, and apologies, we have had a few technical glitches, and I know John has been really trying hard to address those issues. But it's just an example of that we're all still learning how to do this.
Yeah, hello, I'm John Ewart. I'm not an archaeologist, but it's just I've been working with Amgueddfa Cymru National Museum of Wales, so that's my part of this. The technical issues, any sort of drop downs that might have gone in, controllers that you saw, cursors wandering across the screen, that's me. Just making my presence felt.
So it was all intentional, was it, John?
Oh yes, yeah.
Not by accident at all.
Very needy.
Brilliant. Well, I'm looking through some of the bits and pieces that we've got to discuss. Obviously, huge issue that's confronted the whole heritage sector. Well, it's confronted everybody in everybody's workplaces, irrespective of where we are. COVID-19 is obviously the big talking point of 2020, and I think we're all witnessing part of history sort of in the making, really. And I know one of the big issues at the museums conference this week was about how we collect COVID, and that's obviously something that's kind of current for museums to be thinking about. But in terms of archaeology, obviously dealing with I suppose a very different set of artifacts. I suppose the major impacts have perhaps been around, as somebody that doesn't practice archaeology, it's been around archaeological field work. I mean, was that the sort of sense that you got through the survey, Kathy?
Certainly in the initial lockdown, yes, fieldwork was obviously one of the things that was affected. But I am aware that it has picked up again now. And although some of the community groups, or very few of the community groups, were able to carry on with their work, the professional organisations have gone back to undertaking their contracts, as it were. Which is good because obviously they need to stay in business. But obviously we need to help those communities to find a way forward as well, because obviously they are nervous about the implications of spreading the disease and what have you, and we just have to find safe ways of doing things, because clearly there are certain things that in archaeology that you can't do virtually, field work being the major one.
Absolutely. Well, I guess, I mean, would some of that archaeological field, obviously mindful that a lot of archaeology takes place around sort of kind of civil engineering or sort of big capital works projects, sort of is part of that process of when you sort of laying the groundwork, I suppose, for those sorts of projects. Was it seen as a sort of a necessary kind of working function? With some of those projects seen as necessary sort of working functions in that, when during that first lockdown we were told, don't go to work if you don't have to, but obviously some sort of projects were able to continue sort of in that physical reality rather than go, through digital. Were archaeological projects seen as necessary and important and vital in that same sense?
Yes, if they were part of a big construction, and there would have been a planning condition that they had archaeologists on there. So, as long as the project was going ahead from the engineering point of view, then the archaeologists would have needed to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I heard recently somebody said to me that one of the biggest employers of archaeologists in the UK at the moment is HS2, the high-speed rail, obviously huge civil engineering infrastructural project, and obviously all the necessary, I suppose, desk research, but also field work that needs to go in around big engineering projects like that. I mean, desk-based research can only go so far through a sort of a laptop and onto the internet. I suppose you've got to perhaps, would archaeologists need access to sort of archive buildings and planning offices to get access to documents as part of that desk research?
Yes, they do, and that has been something of an issue, sort of locally, in that some of that archive material hasn't been available. I think they have started reopening now. But there will have been a few things where things might have been delayed in the progress because of not being able to get access to that. That's in a sort of a preliminary phase of work. Usually that piece of research is undertaken, and so some things may well have been delayed because of not being able to access the suitable material to put together an assessment of how archaeology might be impacted on a particular development, for instance.
Yeah, and I noticed, I mean, a big part of your presentation as well was looking at the other side of archaeology. Obviously, a lot of people tend to think of archaeology as being sort of field with people in trenches with trowels, that sort of side of things. But obviously, there's a lot more to it, and a huge part of the discipline these days is about sort of the other end, the kind of the community engagement, the interpretation side of things. And obviously, that is something that has lent itself better to digital, which I suppose is where kind of John's project also kind of mirrors some of the findings that perhaps you found in your survey, Kathy. I mean, I don't know if you wanted to pick that up.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting actually that some of the talks that followed on from the survey one sort of almost say, well, here's the solution, if you know what I mean, that that people are coming up with these fantastic ways of getting things out there virtually. But yeah, what you say is correct. It is increasingly a very important part of the sector's work is to share the information that we're gathering, and involving communities and all sorts of people with our work, and because it's their archaeology, so it is really important that we find a way forward where that we can, and clearly we are, from the work we've been seeing this morning, to continue with that ambition to make archaeology available for all.
I suppose, I mean, I know a lot of people traditionally who come to the face-to-face archaeology day are representative of sort of local kind of community history groups, community heritage organisations, or they might be sort of independent researchers or researching their own sort of history heritage in a voluntary capacity rather than kind of being a heritage professional. So they might think that community heritage projects are of a lower priority in that instance. I mean, and obviously, as you say, the big kind of civil engineering stuff, that's going to be seen as a necessary thing that might come first in terms of as restrictions from COVID are lifted. When do you think you might? I mean, obviously, it's impossible to map out the trajectory of the kind of the restrictions and the kind of the pandemic as such. But when do we think that kind of community archaeology might start again in terms of being resuming what we consider normal service?
It sort of already is starting. So there have been one or two community projects. One or two happened over the summer, and I am aware that some are now sort of putting stuff in the autumn, to sort of play catch up with what they couldn't do earlier in the year. There's a certain amount to learn about how to carry something like this out using social distancing, because normally we're all stuck in the bottom of a trench together, and it's there's a lot of teamwork involved in those sorts of projects. So there'll be limited numbers. We wouldn't really be able to get back to absolutely service as normal until the pandemic is past, whenever that might be, if ever, which is a bit of a sad thought. But there's certainly be community archaeology going on in some form, or already is, and hopefully is picking up now going into the autumn.
Brilliant. I don't know. sort of moving on from that, John, I want to bring you in perhaps to talk a little bit about how kind of digital, and I'm aware from my work in the sector, in a broader heritage, not just in the field of archaeology, the broader heritage sector, about the importance that kind of digital suddenly became the heritage sector's kind of safety net and saviour in a lot of ways. A lot of institutions turned to digital to start to continue to engage with their audiences. I mean, you're somebody that doesn't, as you mentioned, you don't, not from specifically from a heritage or an archaeological background. I don't know, what was your sort of take on people suddenly taking up digital in that way?
It is a response. It's not something that's been planned, and it's and some of it has worked and some of it hasn't worked. And right back at the beginning when Kathy mentioned, I mean, it's I'm sure it was in the first talk, in that it's not going to replace actually seeing something and holding something and experiencing it firsthand. But it's been nice that things have been able to continue in some sort of fashion. The other thing is just mentioned in the last meeting about discussions with community groups. One thing that any sort of archaeological work that's funded by a public funder, they want to see the engagement. And it's some way in which you can say, yes, we have been doing it. And in some ways, it's a little bit more tangible than just saying numbers of people who turned up or something like that. So you have got some actual proof that engagement has happened.
I suppose that's the great thing with digital, isn't it? Is that you can kind of get analytics, and you can and these days that analytics will look at a whole range of kind of supposed sort of demographic markers, you know, age, gender, geography, as well as kind of the digital stuff, you know, what sort of browser people are using, or, you know, all that sort of techie kind of stuff. But it will kind of take in, you know, in the work that I've been doing with podcasts, you can sort of see that there's somebody from Singapore downloaded it, or, you know, it's something like that, which is kind of provides a fascinating insight that you might not get with footfall in an exhibition. You know, you just got to kind of hope that they fill in a feedback form, or that you've actually got to go around and actually speak to these people to get that depth of information, haven't you?
Yeah, and the thing that I'm finding quite exciting is just how accessible some of this stuff is to the schoolroom, the classroom, and to local history groups as well. Just you've got okay, yeah, actually having the artifact there in the classroom would be far better, but you know, when it actually comes to practically doing it, they have got access to the research as it's coming out.
I suppose in that sense, it's kind of digital has really kind of democratized things a lot more, isn't it? You know, it's made things accessible. Whereas before there might have been a whole range of kind of physical, social, economic barriers to accessing some of this information, whether it was, you know, through an exhibition, a museum, or a heritage site, or otherwise. But now, you know, by virtue of digital, we do obviously still have a lot of barriers to overcome. And I know, you know, there's been a lot of talk recently about kind of digital poverty, digital infrastructure, digital literacy that we still need to kind of overcome. But I suppose that, you know, there's always going to be perhaps something that's going to, you know, it's going to be impossible to completely eradicate every form of barrier. And obviously we can work as hard as we can. You know, I would never kind of be complacent about that. But I think, you know, but I suppose in a lot of ways it does democratize it, doesn't it?
It does, and just that one last thing that I wanted to say. I know people were asking on the comments about when is this artifact going to, the resource that I've been working on, when's that going to be available? The issue is that there's filming going on as well, and what National Museum want to do is produce everything all at once, so that when the filming's ready, when all the standardization has been done, then the whole lot is going to be rolled out in the near future. Which it also gives me a bit of time to work with some other groups and get some more content on there as well.
Brilliant.
Thanks, John. I'm mindful of time, and I'm mindful that people probably want to have that lovely lunch that we usually provide. So you'll just have to imagine that we've provided that lovely lunch with the nice cakes to go with it. Hopefully next year we'll be able to actually provide that. But I just want to come to Rowan, possibly just finishing off. really interesting talk, and I can see lots of people have been inspired by, you know, seeing the comments in YouTube, and thanks to everyone who's put them in. Just wondering, how do you see, obviously I worked with you on this project, but of course you're the interpretation officer for the National Park Authority, so you're the sort of on interpretation. How do you see that work, you know, taking that forward? I know you were sort of thinking about, you know, looking at interpreting hunter-gatherers from a different perspective, and also being aware of maybe how our own views might be shaping the way we're interpreting. So how do you see things developing in the future?
It's always being really attentive to, you know, to your own tendencies to introduce your biases, whatever they may be, whether that's the kind of liberal Westphalian hippie bias that I've internalized from a young age, being the child of 1970s English migrants, or, you know, whatever that bias might be. So it's always being aware of that. But I think also about trying to bring other people's voices in wherever you can, wherever you have that opportunity. So I think increasingly we'll be trying to work in much more engaged ways, and developing, co-creating resources with communities wherever we can, wherever time and budget allows. So that hopefully will be that's the future direction of travel for me, I think.
Rowan, I was really interested. I was just going to ask. I mean, you know, when I was studying 20 years ago, doing my master's degree, there's a lot of talk then about decolonising museums and decolonising the kind of this act of, you know, restoring kind of colonial artifacts to their, you know, to their original homes, and also to kind of postmodernism in terms of interpretation, you know, kind of feminist approaches to interpretation. It just seems it's taken so long, though, for these things to actually take root and you know, become grounded in the profession. I mean, that was 20 years ago, and you know, I was a sort of young hopeful, you know, kind of postgraduate, and you know, it's still 20-25 years, and still big institutions are still kind of refusing to have conversations about returning colonial artifacts. And you know, so how long do you think it's going to take? I mean, I know it's impossible for us to know, but
well, I would say that the momentum seems to have been gathering much more so over the past several years, and I'd say like the work that we've done on this illustration actually started last year. So it started before, you know, this renewed upsurge in interest in things like Black Lives Matter or decolonisation that we're seeing at the moment. And, you know, similarly, the calls for decolonisation in the museum sector, as you pointed out, have been going on for a lot longer. And we must be about the same age, because when I was doing my degrees, again, you know, it was tackling ways of thinking really, and world views, and actually how that comes in. So it's not simply a matter of whose artifacts are they, how were they acquired, in the process of colonisation, how do people suffer? It's also how, you know, our ways of thinking, what we project onto things, is also another way in which we colonise the past still. And we always will in some way bring our own, you know, where we are now in the world today, all our life experiences, to you know, whatever we're interpreting, which is possibly why often I get quite anecdotal in the way I start to talk about things. But I think that helps people to relate really to what you're trying to get across. So.
I think that's a really important point, Rowan. It's I think for me, and it's that discipline around archaeological theory, I think it's that you're aware of your biases and how that might influence your interpretation. So yeah, it's a really important point. So I'm mindful that people probably want to take a break. They probably want to go and get some lunch. But remember, we have the virtual walk that's going to be available. We're gonna make it available after this. So I'm just gonna finish off this session in Welsh, and then maybe Stuart can help me out with the English. And if the panel could just stay where you are while we're doing this, because it's just nice to have more people in here. Otherwise, it just feels like it's just me and Stuart. And poor John hidden behind the camera. So fel fi'n sôn, da ni wedi dod I diwedd sesiwn y bore. Ymddiheuriadau fod ni dipyn bach yn hwyr, ond fesai fi'n hoffi diolch I Cathy, Rowan, John, Stuart wrth gwrs, am helpu fi cyflwyno, Ac wrth gwrs i Simon sydd ddim yn gallu bod yma heddiw, a mae'n gwych i weld bod bobl wedi rhoi sylwadau fewn. So mae'r sesiwn yn mynd i dod i ben nawr, a wedyn fi gallu cyfle fel ar fi sôn i wylio'r taith tywys dros amser cinio, a newn ni adael y bloc yma ar Hefyd. Os da chi wedi methu dan, neu da chi wedi gallu gwylio fo gyd, ydych chi fynd yn dôl iddo fo. Eto, os mae gen chi unrhyw cwestiynau o'r bore, postiwch nhw. Os da chi ddim yn gallu ymweld yn sesiwn prawn yma, mae gennym ni'r ffurflen, adborth ar-lein. Mae'r link ar ein channel ni, a so'n wych os ydych chi'n gallu jyst roed yr adborth i ni os da chi ddim yn dod i'r sesiwn prawn yma. Felly, un person arall wedi anghofio, diolch i ni Sophie. Mae wedi bod yn gwych, mae wedi bod yn cadw llygad ar y chat i ni. Felly, diolch i hi hefyd. So, na i basio ymlaen i Stuart.
Fab. Yeah, thanks, Tomos. Yeah, we're going to wrap it up now. Thank you very much to our panel for the Q&A. Thanks to Kathy and to Rowan. And I think that, you know, we could have probably, I'd love to spend a lot longer with both of you talking about the presentations. You know, just cut off by time constraints. But hopefully, when COVID's all over, we can all get together and talk about it in much more detail. But no, thank you all very much for your time this morning. Thank you much for your time in producing those presentations. Been absolutely brilliant. Thank you, of course, to John and to Sophie that have been helping us this morning. Really grateful for their assistance, and obviously John for his presentation too. As Thomas mentioned, we've got a virtual walk that we're going to post on the YouTube channel. So those of you that are watching live, we're going to finish this session very, very shortly. But you should, if you have a look at, if you come back either in 5 minutes or so, you will see a new video that will have appeared on their virtual tour of Awdurdod. It's in the medium of Welsh, but with English subtitles. So please do have a look at that. It's a really, really fantastic piece of work. A lot of work has gone into it, but it's a lovely little virtual walk for you to enjoy whilst you're having your lunch. People on the chat talking about the usual catering arrangements at the college. This year, you'll all be pleased to know it's exactly to your dietary requirements and it's exactly to your budget. So you know, there hopefully won't be any complaints about it in the feedback form this year. We are going to sign off there. We're back again at just before 2 o'clock, I expect. We'll probably be kind of live about 5-10 minutes or so beforehand, just having a quick chat before we kind of kick off promptly then at 2 o'clock. I don't think there's much else for us to say, is there, Thomas? I think we're going to sign off there.
I was just going to say, we'll try to stick to time. We will try our best to finish at 4 o'clock. And if you've got any comments about the virtual walk, please do put them in the chat. Sophie was involved, and John as well, with the production of that film, and myself. So we can probably answer those questions if you have any in that live Q&A later this afternoon. So thanks, everyone.